The old abandoned asylum was a place of fear and terror for those who knew of it. It had been closed down for many years, and the once beautiful building had been left to decay and rot. The windows were boarded up, and the doors were locked, but people still claimed to see strange things there at night. Amy had always been fascinated with abandoned places, and the abandoned asylum was no exception. She had read about the history of the place, and knew that it was once a place of healing, but that it had been shut down after a series of strange incidents occurred. She decided that she wanted to explore the asylum for herself and convinced her friend, Mark, to come along. They arrived at the asylum just before sunset, and the sight of the abandoned building sent shivers down their spines. They parked their car outside the main entrance and started to walk around the perimeter of the building. The walls were high and made of brick, and the windows were all boarded up. The only way in was through the front entrance. As they approached the entrance, they noticed that the door was slightly ajar. It was strange because they knew that the asylum was closed and locked up tight. They cautiously pushed the door open and stepped inside. The interior of the building was dark and eerie. The walls were stained with damp, and the air was musty and stale. They walked down the hallway, their footsteps echoing off the walls. They could hear strange noises coming from deep within the building, but they couldn't make out what they were. They turned a corner and saw a door at the end of the hallway. It was slightly open, and they could see a faint light coming from inside. They cautiously approached the door and peered inside. What they saw made their blood run cold. Inside the room, there was a figure sitting in a chair facing away from them. The room was dimly lit, but they could make out the figure's silhouette. It was wearing a long white coat, and its head was hanging down. They couldn't see its face, but they could hear it breathing heavily. They were frozen in fear, unsure of what to do. Suddenly, the figure stood up and turned around. Its face was pale and gaunt, and its eyes were sunken and dark. It looked straight at them, and they could see that its mouth was twisted into a grotesque smile. Amy and Mark turned and ran, their hearts pounding in their chests. They didn't stop until they were back outside in the safety of their car. They sat there for a few minutes, trying to catch their breath and make sense of what had just happened. They decided to leave and never come back, but something kept pulling Amy back to the asylum. She couldn't get the figure out of her head, and she needed to know more about it. She started to research the history of the asylum, and discovered that it had a dark past. In the 1960s, the asylum was known for using experimental treatments on patients, some of which were extremely dangerous. Patients were often subjected to electroshock therapy, lobotomies, and other forms of inhumane treatment. It was rumored that some patients were even used for bizarre scientific experiments. The more she learned, the more convinced she became that there was something evil lurking inside the asylum. She needed to go back and investigate further. She returned to the asylum a few nights later, armed with a flashlight and a camera. She cautiously made her way down the hallway, her heart pounding in her chest. She could hear strange noises coming from deep within the building, but she pushed forward. As she approached the end of the hallway, she saw the door that had been opened before. This time, it was closed. She hesitated for a moment, but then slowly pushed it open. The room was dark, but she could see a faint light coming from a small lamp in the corner. As she stepped inside, she heard a faint whisper coming from the darkness. "Hello, Amy." She froze, her heart racing. She shone her flashlight around the room but couldn't see anyone. She tried to turn and leave, but the door was suddenly shut and locked from the outside. She was trapped. She could feel someone or something in the room with her, watching her every move. The whispering grew louder, and she could hear footsteps coming towards her. She turned to run but was suddenly grabbed from behind. She struggled to break free but was dragged across the room towards a large metal door. The door creaked open, and she was thrown inside. The room was completely dark, and she could hear the sound of dripping water. She tried to get up but found that she was tied to a chair. Suddenly, she felt a cold breath on her neck. She could feel someone or something whispering in her ear. She tried to scream but found that she couldn't. The whispers grew louder and louder until they were screaming inside her head. She felt a sharp pain in her neck and then everything went black. When Amy woke up, she was lying on the floor outside the asylum. She didn't remember how she got there, but she knew that something had happened to her. She tried to get up but found that her body was sore and bruised. As she walked away from the asylum, she could hear the sound of whispers in her ear. She turned to look back, but the building was dark and quiet. Years went by, and Amy tried to forget about the asylum and what had happened there. But she could never shake the feeling that something was following her, watching her every move. She started to see strange things at night, shadows moving in the darkness, and whispers coming from nowhere. One night she woke up to find the figure from the asylum standing at the foot of her bed. It was wearing the same long white coat, and its face was twisted into the same grotesque smile. It whispered in her ear, "You belong to us now." Amy never returned to the asylum again, but she could never escape the fear and terror that it had brought into her life. The abandoned building still stands to this day, a reminder of the dark past that haunts it. And some say that if you listen closely, you can still hear the whispers coming from deep within its walls.